All right, folks. Welcome once again, everybody, to Irish Sports Daily Power Hour. I'm your host, Mike Frank, here with Jamie Uyeyama, and we're going to have Greg uh, Flamong also join the show, who's producing the show, get his thoughts on some things as well. Lots going on right now with Notre Dame football and Notre Dame recruiting. So we'll be doing that. We also wanted to say thanks to all our listeners out there and people in the chat today in the chat, folks. I think we'll have a little bit of time to maybe even take a few questions. So, Greg, keep an eye out on some potential questions from the chat today. Also, if you are not a member of Irish Sports Daily, it's a great time to sign up. You can go to the front page of Irish Sports Daily, click on the premium section, sign up today. There's a lot going on right now with Notre Dame recruiting, Notre Dame spring practice, and we're certainly covering all of that. It was a big weekend for recruiting, a lot of top guys in that they wanted. So there's lots of updates from all that and what's gone on. Also, if you are listening to the show and you want to check us out on YouTube, you can find us at irishsportsdaily.com or Irish Sports Daily. Search for Irish Sports Daily on YouTube. And then you can also subscribe to the channel and like our videos. It'll definitely help us, and it'll help you as well. You'll be able to get our videos and know when we're going live, like today's show, and you can also kind of watch the show as well. So before we get going, I wanted to mention our sponsor, which is ESQ. ESQ has been making the best handmade custom suits, sport coats, tuxedos, and shirts for the last decade. They've been featured on GQ, ESPN, USA Today, and you've seen them dressing your favorite players and coaches. ESQ only gets the best fabric from Italy and England's top mills. With over 40,000 fabrics to choose from, you're guaranteed to look your best. Go visit esqclothing.com and book your appointment. Mention ISD and get 10% off your entire purchase. Once again, that's esqclothing.com. All right, guys. We'll start with you, obviously, Jamie. Some things kind of stood out to me. We've had some interviews. Some of the coaches have done some things, and I just kind of wanted to point out some things. I think, especially about the quarterback thing. It did. I want to read a couple comments that Gino said about Steve Angeli. And I'm not saying that this is telling. I just think what it says is that Gino likes Steve Angeli. And the first thing he says is, I think Steve is just approaching it like it's job. Like, I'm the guy that everybody's got to beat out. I'm the guy with the experience. I'm the guy that's next in line. This is my job. And he talks about how he thinks that that's important in the way you do it. And he talks a lot about his leadership and how much he really likes Steve's ability to lead and how he's always been a natural born leader. And then he also talks about just having the experience that he has. And this quote here where he says, yeah, I think it weighs a lot in any industry. If you got a guy that's been in there and done it and had success, it speaks volumes to the people around you. There's a little bit more credibility that comes with it. And those who haven't kind of still got to go out and prove it. You can do things in 7-on-7 and great things throwing 1-on-1s, but until you do it in a stadium with 80,000 people screaming at you and coming after you, trying to slam you into the ground, I think that matters. And I do think that does matter. And guys, we've seen in the past how coaches, they love experience. They just do. And I think for a long time, a lot of people have assumed, oh, it's going to be CJ Carr or, maybe Minchie rises to the thing. It's not going to be Steve. A lot of people have thought that. I don't think that this is going to be easy to beat Steve Angeli out. And I think for all the reasons that we've said all along, Jamie, the guy gets in the game and he does really good things. The only really bad thing that he does is the sack thing. Now, a guy like when you talk like Jimmy Clausen, he struggled with the same thing. But part of it was recognition. Part of it was just not the wheels to escape. He just didn't have the athleticism to escape like I think Angeli can. Angeli can move. It's just more he doesn't feel the pocket as well as some other quarterbacks. Can you improve on that? And if he can, I think it's going to be hard to beat Steve out. Your thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's easily the one thing that has stood out as his weakness because almost everything else is kind of shown out to be a strength. Like, I mean, he's got a live arm, he's accurate, he's definitely poised. Like he's someone that and Greg and I were talking about this last week, that it's it's obviously it's a strength, but it's almost like a detractor because his eyes are down the field. He isn't really affected by the rush. Like he maybe will get sacked too much, but he's not affected by the rush in a way that it ruins. Like he's not taking it off his read, and he's not missing what's in front of him. And I think that's a big thing. But I too thought that what Gino was saying, obviously, so much focus is going to be on the quarterback battle and all that. It's like pretty much the biggest thing in storyline of spring. But just what he was saying about Angeli kind of fits exactly what he's been saying about him since Gino Guidugli came on as coach. Because one of the things that he talked about with Angeli that very first spring was how like impressed he was with him, and like how like he was really like picking it up and doing things. But just everything he said about how, like you mentioned, it's his job. Like he's playing like it's his job. Him going and doing that, the guys having belief in him. And it just reminded me a lot of, I mean, he's not the same player, but it reminded me a lot of Ian Book and how that's how the coaches talked about him. That's how the players felt about him. And you can say a lot, and I know there's definitely people that are, everyone's got their own quarterback out of these three that they want to win the job, right? For different reasons. Right? They're, everyone's got a preference. And I don't think there's probably like a smaller percentage of people that want Angeli to be the guy because he's the least flashy out of them all, right? He's definitely was the lowest ranked out of them all and all of that, right? But the thing that you can't really, I don't know how you can't put a value on if there's belief in a guy and the players believe in that and he's out there actually doing it and executing. So that is going to be really hard to beat out when that's how people feel about him. That's how the other guys in the offense kind of feel about him. That's just something that is rare. And you gotta go and take it from him. Like the other guys have to see it and they have to say, I mean, it's obvious Kenny is the best guy, or it's obvious CJ is the best guy. Because if that doesn't happen, then Steve Angeli is going to be the quarterback.
It's kind of funny because for all the reasons that people were frustrated with Book at times, I get that people don't want another Book, and I understand that. I've always liked Ian. I thought he was a good player. But when it come to sometimes when it came down to game time and the crunch time, just didn't quite deliver. And it wasn't. I don't put it all on his hands or his shoulders. Other guys got to make plays too, and other guys got to block and do those things. But it comes down to really who moves the team, who does the best job, and I think that's where you're going to have an interesting battle as to who does it. I mean, I think if you ask the coaches who throws the best and most accurate deep ball most consistently, it's probably Steve. I think the other guys have bigger arms, maybe a little bit bigger. Certainly Kenny does, but is it as consistent as Steve? I don't know. I don't know. When you talk about the short intermediate routes, I think it's Steve. Steve throws the ball very, very well and is very accurate and gets the ball out. And as you mentioned, he's not afraid to stay in the pocket a lot of times to his detriment. But if you got great pass protection, if you have a really good pass protection, that's the guy you want in there. You want that guy who's willing to take the hit and is looking for ways to stay in the pocket and find players downfield. And again, this is not me, champion for Steve. It's not me saying that Steve's going to be the guy and I've heard something. I'm just saying it's going to be very difficult because I think he has the respect of his teammates, definitely. He's an extremely well-liked guy. I think a lot of guys on the team feel like Steve's earned it. Steve has remained loyal to the program. Steve has never wavered in his, want to be the quarterback at Notre Dame, and I think guys respect that in a day of NIL and bouncing in and out and that type of thing. So again, there's so much that goes into it, but at the end of the day, it's kind of like Gino said. Sometimes, like they're talking about reps, and he's talking about, well, we can't really make it 100% equal because if some guy goes on a 16 play drive, I'm not taking him out. We're going to let us see if he can finish the drive. And I have a feeling that Steve is going to be the guy that's going to convert more of those drives. But as we saw, Jamie, in last year at O-line, sometimes you have to go with the better future, and especially if you look at it. And so this is why it's interesting to me, because I think we look at the next question is, do you make the decision after spring, or do you wait for fall to make that decision, especially when you have what could be a very good offense this year, right? You've got certainly the most talented running back room I can remember. I feel the offensive line is going to be as good as possibly could be. I love the tight end situation. I think that that's going to be a bigger role this year. Maybe not as many tight ends on the field, but I think that they're going to be more effective catching the football and being more part of the offense. And I really would be surprised if the wide receiver situation isn't considerably better than last year. And last year was okay. It wasn't great. But I think you can see a big jump in that. So does it make sense if you're Gino and you're Denbrock to say, you know what, maybe we need to pull the Band-Aid off and just name a guy after spring, because we want somebody leading summer, leading and saying, this is your guy, it's your team, you got to get this prepared and go from there. And then I think we need to look at what happens if they make that decision versus what happens if they make the decision in fall. But what are your thoughts on that? And I think that the real answer is you can only make that decision in spring if you really know that there's one way better than the other. I think we can agree with that, correct?
Yeah. I mean, it's the only way. And I have a feeling that they won't have that. So I don't know how likely that is. Like, I think one guy has to be just, like you said, miles ahead of everybody else. And I just don't know if it's going to be that, right? And I don't even know too if there's going to be that much separation from 1 to 3, let alone 1 to 2, right? So I think that's going to be difficult. And the other thing is too, is that in an ideal world where if this was an NFL team, yes, you would like to have that guy and do all these things and have them for the summer and get all these things set up, right? But this isn't an NFL team. These guys can go in the portal in the spring. And let's just say they went out and they said at the end of spring, well, it's obvious Steve is our guy. They got to make sure that Kenny Minchie and CJ Carr don't leave right then. Yeah. Because if both of those guys left after, that's a disaster. It is a disaster, right? Because the other thing is too, is you just don't know. And I think it's funny because I see some people like freaking out about like if Steve Angeli is the quarterback. You don't know if Steve Angeli is the quarterback and he's the quarterback for 3 games. And then that's it, because one of those guys.
I'm reading the same comments. And it's kind of comical because it's like you don't have any idea what would happen if you put Kenny or CJ Carr in the game. It could be way worse. You really have no idea. You just are assuming based off of recruiting rankings. And I just don't think that. I mean, I'm not lying here. I don't think that the difference between the guys is big. I really don't. At least not right now. And people seem to think like CJ Carr's got this huge upside, like he's just going to be this amazing player. And he may be down the line, but he's not there now. By all accounts, from everything I've heard, he's not there now. He may get there, and I think he has the potential to get there, but so does Kenny Minchie. We know that Angeli has a ceiling, and he's probably not going to get a whole lot better than he is right now. he'll get better with more play, but is that good enough to win? And everybody's like, well, just put Carr in there, put Minchie in there. Well, what if you lose to A&M and Miami in the process of doing that?
You're out of the
Then you're
playoff,
completely
and then
out.
it's
Yeah,
over.
exactly.
The
So you have
season's
to be
over.
smart about it. But
Yeah.
anyway, go ahead, Jamie. I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's just, the
No,
comments
no,
are really funny.
I just it's just one of these things, right? The thing is like they don't know and we don't know. So
No,
you gotta let it play out, and you have to see
I think we have a
where they're
better
at.
idea than they do. But yes,
Yeah, yes, but
yeah,
but
yeah.
you know, I'm talking about they, like I'm talking about Notre Dame doesn't know, like
Oh
they
no, I
don't know
agree
for
with you.
sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like
I thought you
they,
meant the fans.
yeah. I mean, they definitely don't know, but the fans definitely don't know. But Notre Dame doesn't know. If they like,
I agree.
if they knew, it would be what it is, and those guys would have left in the winter, or if they thought that was going to be the way, right? Like, I think people are viewing it in a way that one, you have to let it play out. Two, like you just don't know how um whoever's going to be the quarterback in week 1 or injuries or whatever, because all the plans happen. I mean, look at what the Malik Zaire to Deshaun Kaiser, and look at Jalen Milroe was the quarterback for Alabama, was struggling a bit. They put in Tyler Buckner. He was horrible in the USF game. Then Milroe takes over and he takes off like a rocket. And he was like really, really good the rest of the year. They make the playoff. Georgia's first national championship season in 2021. Stetson Bennett wasn't the starter at the beginning of the year. He got the job because what's his, oh god, I forget his name now. The transfer from USC, he lost the job. He got hurt and then he ended up losing the job. Like, it was one of those things where things changed throughout the year. Trevor Lawrence in 2018 wasn't the starter at the beginning of the year. And if people recall early in that year when they beat Texas A&M, Kelly Bryant, like they needed him. He was the one who won that game, right? So we don't know how any of that is going to play out. I think people need to just like let it all play out. And I think, first of all, it's a really good thing that Gino Guidugli's saying this stuff about Steve Angeli. That should give people confidence that, like, hey, if he wins the job, like, this is like a real thing. And for people who maybe, aren't believers in him. And I just think that there's going to be so much of it, and we're not getting as much access, obviously, this spring. And that's on purpose, because I think they don't want outside pressure on these guys. And they wanted to kind of let it all play out. And I think that's a good thing. And I think my guess is that by the end of spring, they won't have anyone named, and they won't have someone, even though, yes, it would be ideal to have somebody there and just like kind of be the leader going into, the off season, like, cause I think that was one of the things with Leonard. It was like, it was able to, establish that even though he didn't participate in the spring, it was obvious he was going to be the quarterback. And that kind of helped gate us thing. And then all these people, because they got to be around him, they knew he was the guy, they knew his personality. They liked him. They were like, yeah, Riley's. And you saw that, how people responded to it. What I really want to see is like when we get into later, because everyone's asking questions about like, it's like early enrollees and stuff we're talking right now. And they're asking, well, what do you think of the quarterbacks? I mean, these guys don't know anything. They're just like in there for the first couple days. I want to hear like later in the spring, not just what like obviously like Mike Denbrock says and Marcus Freeman says and all that, but I want to hear what some of the players are saying about some of these other guys, because even though all these guys are media trained and they're, careful of what they say, a lot of these guys, you can tell who they think and how they feel about it. They can't hide it when they're talking about certain guys. So I want to know, when we get to the point when Jaden Greathouse is speaking to the media, what does he think? Because, and obviously Angeli has been the guy throwing to him, but the way he's talking about
Yeah.
the way he talks about Minchie and Carr, if he isn't talking about them in glowing terms, then to me, that's an indication. I'm like, well, maybe those guys really aren't that contenders for it, right? Like, so um I want to see that kind of thing when they get to it, when they get to to Raritan, to Greathouse, to all these guys who are, they play it close to the vest, but how you talk about these other guys, when you just say nice things, are you really like going, to really like a bat for these guys to say like, hey, this guy's really like a contender for the job?
I just read a guy saying I'd rather start Abert over Herbert over Steve.
Okay.
I
I don't even
I don't even know what to say to that. I mean, are you serious? Again, no disrespect to the guy. I mean, you can have your opinion, but there's no way I would do that. There's literally no way I
No.
would do that. And again, it's your opinion. I understand that, but there's so much to learn. There's just way too much to learn. And let's be honest, Herbert was a guy that had, um, he's got a long way to go. He did not play in a very good league as far as talent goes. He's never seen anything like what he's going to see in a Notre Dame defense. It's just not even close. It's not even close. So maybe that is a joke. He says it's a joke, and maybe that was a joke, but it is what it is. I mean, I just laughed at that. And again, I'm not champion for Steve. I'm definitely not. I'm just saying I don't think it's as wide open or as a cut and dry as a lot of people think. I really don't. And again, the guy says I would start Rezak over Steve though.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
I
think he's just trolling. He's just joking around.
He's got to be trolling. There's no way.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's kind of interesting, the chat that we got here, and I love the chat because it's interesting to read while we're doing the show here. So that's one of the nice things about if you watch it online, you get to be a part of the chat. So so here's the thing though, and here's where it gets interesting is let's say we do name the starter in the fall. If you name Carr the starter, my guess is Minchie's gone immediately. Now, I realize that Minchie can't go anywhere and start, right? I know that he can't go anywhere and start, but I should say, I think Minchie's gone, especially if Steve stays. And I think Steve would stay because he's not going to start anywhere, and he knows that if Carr's named the starter and he gets injured, it's definitely going to be Steve coming in to take over at that point. Because he's got the experience and he's done things, and Notre Dame would certainly want him ideally to be the number 2 quarterback if they name Carr. And if I'm Minchie, I look at the situation, I say, you know what, I'm never going to get a shot here. I'm gone. Why even go to practice? I could tear my ACL just running around. I could do a lot of things, hurt myself and my chances. So I think if Carr was named the quarterback in this fall, and they can convince Steve to stay, Minchie's probably gone. Now, if it's Steve, now you got a real question, because if you do name Steve, if you're CJ Carr, you probably stick around. But Steve's got 2 years to play, right? And he doesn't have, at this point, what I would consider, NFL traits. Now, he may develop that, right? He may develop that and show that, but we just have not seen the elite arm, the ability to, make huge plays downfield, pocket, awareness, all that type of stuff. I don't think he could become an NFL quarterback in 1 year. Maybe he could, so maybe not, but if he's starting this year, then he has next year. And if you're CJ Carr at that point, you're like, man, when will I ever get to play? And if you're Minchie, you're like, oh, I'm never going to get a shot. So there's a real cost if you name Steve as your quarterback. You better be sure, because you could very easily lose both guys. And I wouldn't blame either for leaving. I really wouldn't. So thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that is the gamble that you take, but also you have to play the guy who's going to give you the best chance to win. So for now, because let's face it, Notre Dame has a team that is good enough to make the playoff and go on another run again, right? Like they have a roster that's there, in my opinion. So I think that you have to be careful with all of these decisions that you make. But you have to, be smart about it. You also have to sell these guys in particular, specifically for this season, because if he's the quarterback and he has a great year and then he's the starter, he's most likely he's going to stay for another year and he's going to be both those guys I would imagine would be gone. But for this season though, yes, I can see like both of them. There is that kind of jaded Mickey, right? Being like, well, I'm out and whatever.
Yeah.
If you're jaded Mickey and you kind of think about how the season played out last year, he probably should have not opted out. And it probably would have worked. He probably regretted it. He probably regretted it because he would have played a ton so regardless of him, like, wanting to be like, hey, I want to start and I want to go to the league and whatever, he would have played a ton on a playoff run against all this film against the thing. And if he was that guy, he would have had that. Then guess what? He could leave after the season
or maybe he wouldn't have.
Or maybe he wouldn't have.
Maybe they just knew Leonard Moore was way better, and he knew it too. You know what I mean?
I mean, if
you look at what we saw on film or what we saw in the field, it was pretty obvious that he was.
I think for sure, but I think that he also would have played, and you just don't know that, Angeli not leaving at, right after the season, right? Which, as Christian reported, like there were people who were offering him to go in and have a chance to start somewhere else. And like the kid from Penn State, Purvula, like he left. And sure enough, he got in at Missouri and he's probably going to be Missouri's starter. And that's great for him. But if he would have stayed, because he was a big part of their offense, he might have been like the difference to help them beat Notre Dame in a close game like that and make the national championship game. And if Angeli would have left, and that would have been Minchie or Carr who had to go in that game against Penn State, maybe Notre Dame doesn't get that field goal. Maybe it goes disaster. Yeah. It's disastrous and all that too, right? So there's all these kind of like what ifs there. So I just think, like I said, with the kind of like the Milroe and the Stetson Bennett thing, the whole thing with Trevor Lawrence, you could just wait around and see how it plays out and do it. And I also think the coaches are going to be like, I mean, both those guys have their red shirts already, so it doesn't matter. They can't burn anything. They don't have to worry about a 4-game thing for them, right?
Yeah.
But I also don't think that they would put those guys in situations, because the coaches, I think one thing that Marcus Freeman has done with the coaching staff, they've been like, obviously team glory and all these guys in it together, but they're also protective of the players and being like, especially too, when guys, they kind of know that whatever, they're doing it in their best interest too. And I think that to me, I don't think a guy like Jaden Mickey or any of these guys could say anything bad about how they were treated at Notre Dame in terms of them, like, what they're doing. And that's I think a big thing. So I think if it goes into like, say, August, I don't know if either one of those guys, like Minchie or Carr, would just straight up opt out of the season and just like not do it. I mean, I think they'd probably leave at the end if it played out like we said. Yes, but I don't know if they would just straight up opt out of it. Maybe opt out of the playoff at the end because, they want to find the right spot for them. Fair enough. But I just don't think that like it's a good thing. Like so much can happen. An injury, Angeli's struggling. Look at Miller Moss, beginning of the year, looked lights out against LSU. And then, by the 8th game, he's done. And, Maivea is the quarterback, and now he's their quarterback, right? So a lot can happen in between that time. So I just think it would be a mistake for those guys, unless you're leaving right after the spring and you're trying to get ahead of it to try to get some, fair enough. But if you're not doing that, I think you almost might as well stay.
Well, it'd be interesting because I think the quarterbacks, if you're Minchie, let's just say if it's Carr and Steve stays, if I'm Minchie, I probably am not gonna. I'm gonna leave. There's certainly a possibility you could earn it, but you're not gonna beat Steve out. I don't think if you're Minchie, if you're not the named guy, um, because at that point Notre Dame would be going with the known. If you went with Carr because you think that he's got the upside and can be the guy, and then he gets hurt, I think just to make sure you get through the season at that point, you'll probably go with the known. If it's Steve, again, I think if you're Minchie, Minchie doesn't have the years left to stick around, you know, eligibility wise to play behind Steve for 2 years. So he'll be gone if it's Steve, I would guess too. So, and obviously if Minchie becomes the quarterback, then who knows what happens. That it's going to be interesting. But the key is, I think, is to try and keep Steve and Carr for the season. Hopefully Minchie sticks around if it's not him. But I think if it's one of the other of Carr or Steve, you want to try and keep the other around. It's just, I think Carr would stick around because he's not going to go anywhere and start. Plus, he's going to be the number 2, and he can sit and learn, and maybe something happens, and then he can beat out Steve. But for me, I just think if I were Minchie, I'd look at it and say, they clearly don't see me, where I'm at. Especially, it depends on the depth chart too. But if it comes out, Carr starts, Carr, Steve, Minchie, I'm definitely leaving if I'm Minchie, because there's just no point in sticking around for me. If I were him, I'd be looking for a role. I'd be working with a quarterbacks coach. I'd be trying to figure out how I get better, that type of thing. And sure, the reps and everything will be valuable, but really as a third string quarterback, when you're trying to, go through a season, how many reps are you getting? Almost
in
none.
practice. Very little,
almost none. So what's the point? So again, I think that's why I could see that happening. All right, I wanted to get to running back too, because I know this is a position that a lot of people talk, and then we'll get to the questions. And I kind of want to, since we're not getting a lot of access right now, I want to kind of talk about what potential things could happen. And running back certainly is a situation I know a lot of people have questions about. Kedron Young, and why would he stick around, and all these types of things, and the running back situation. I mean, I think you have 3 guys right now who have earned it in Love, Price, and Aeneas Williams, but I don't think that Aeneas's job is a sure thing as the third down back. I'm sure Jeremiah Love would like to earn that to show the NFL that he could be that guy. I'm sure Jabron Payne, who was a lot of people thought that was going to be his job before he got hurt, and he's been in that role a little bit as well. So, but the thing about it is the following year, if you look at it, we know Jeremiah Love is going to be gone, right? If you look at J.D. Price, then what happens? Now, if J.D. Price has a good year and he hits a bunch of home runs and some big games, he's never going to get the same kind of stats as Jeremiah Love. But if he shows the home running hitting ability, he shows a little bit more that I can run inside and be effective, I don't see any reason for him to come back. Do you? I mean,
No.
Maybe you could be the featured back, but you've already shown the NFL that you can run inside, that you can hit the home run. Could you possibly become a first-round draft pick if you stuck around? Sure, that's possible. But I think just with his speed and what he's going to run and his size, and he has shown ability to run inside, he can catch the ball. The only thing pass pro, I think, is really the thing we don't know about him at this point. But I think he has enough things to where he'd be a third-round pick for sure. I just think that he's shown enough to be that kind of a back. And then it comes down to Jabron Payne. If you're Jabron Payne and Love is gone and Price is gone, what do you do if you're Jabron Payne? Because if he doesn't become the third down back this year, he's not going to get a lot of carries. And I think Jabron Payne is good enough to be a power 4 back. I really do. Maybe not at Notre Dame or Ohio State or Penn State, but certainly
for a lot
Indiana,
of teams, I think.
Yeah, Indiana, Purdue, Iowa State, lots of teams like that. You could easily be a featured back. And so If I'm Jabron Payne, I look at the situation and I say, well, unless Notre Dame guarantees me that I'm going to be the featured back, and not only guarantees me that, Jamie, but also backs it up with the NIL, right? Because if Notre Dame's also going to spend the NIL, that means that they believe that I'm the guy. Otherwise, I'm gone. And so let's say Jabron Payne leaves, then you have Aeneas, Kedron Young, Nolan James, and whoever else you bring in. Suddenly everything opens up really well for Kedron Young and Aeneas Williams and Nolan James. So a lot of people are worried about how do you keep them happy. I think everybody who's here this year realizes they're probably not going to get a whole lot of carries with Price and Love. Third down back is up for battle at this point. But next year, I think if Price especially has a good year, which I think he's gonna, because we saw how, I mean, Jeremiah Love made a big jump, I think, from his first year to last year.
Oh,
He
yeah.
made a big jump, huge jump. And I think Jadarian Price is going to do the same thing. He may not get as many opportunities, but I tell you what, if he does make those plays, he's going to get the carries because you don't want to put too much on Love and wear him down, especially if your other back is making the same types of plays. So just your overall thoughts on the running back situation and how you see that playing out.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they're loaded there, and it's a great problem to have. It's probably they're probably as loaded there as they've been in, like, honestly, since like the 90s, really, with kind of like those holsters.
I think they're even more loaded. I really do.
Like it's really like incredible. But I agree with you that Love, I mean, it's obvious. The only thing that would keep him longer would be health, right?
Yeah.
And even that, probably he's still probably going. And he should be the best back in college football this year. And I think Price too. He rushed for 746 yards last year. He could rush for 900 plus this year. Easily. I think that's on the table. He might rush for over 1,000. Like, got to remember that they probably, even if say Mitchie wins the job, he's the most athletic and the one they would run the most out of the quarterbacks. He's not going to run as much as Leonard did. No. So you're going to take some of those carries, and those are going to go to Love and Price. And so I think they're going to, and I think also the line's going to be better, and there's just a lot going to be there for those guys to there. So I would be shocked if both of those guys, they're going to be in the NFL next fall. That's how I see it. And that's also why I just don't see why, yes, someone could go and it might be a bit of a frustrating year for some of these other guys, but they'd really is set up. They would be nuts to leave. And like you said, Payne, yes, because his clock is running out in terms of what he's doing. And if he didn't have these guarantees, and if he didn't, become the third guy this year, then I think, yeah, you can easily see that. But for like Aeneas Williams and Kedron Young, like Kedron Young could go from like, hey, he's only playing, like he's going to play a bit more this year, but not really get that much. And then he could be the featured guy in 2026. Like that could happen. Like it could easily happen. And
maybe even likely.
Yeah.
Maybe even likely.
Yeah. And then also too, like, Love played through injuries and stuff last year, but let's just say that injury happened to Love in the middle of the season. If that happened in the middle of the season, that would be Price and Aeneas, and then Kedron Young would have got more carries during that time. Sure. They probably would have burned his red shirt, and he would have probably played during that time. So that easily could happen this year too with these guys in terms of like health, because it just so happened that those guys were healthy throughout, and then Love didn't get hurt till the USC game, right? So I think that could play out that way, and I think they're going to be in a good spot next year too. Like with what they have, obviously. Like I'm a big fan of Nolan James too. Like I think he has a chance to be a really good player.
I do too. I do too.
Obviously, they're going to get a good back in this class. At least one good back in this class too. So Um, I wonder if they'll end up taking 2. We'll see. But um, I just think that, where they're at right now, um, if it looked like Love and Price were going to be there for a long term, I could totally understand why guys would want to bounce. But it's really just this year, and that's
Yeah.
it. And then this is what you want. You want to have a situation where Alabama and Georgia, what they would always have, where they would have, man, they got so many backs. Look at the backups. Oh my gosh. And then those next guys just step in and step up, right? That's what you want to have every year. And I really think they're kind of like set up to have that and be as good and as deep as they've been at running back in a while, because they've just, even if you say like they're not landing like 5-star backs or whatever, the backs they're landing are very, very good every year.
Yeah.
They're not having those years where, obviously there was years with Autry Denson where, he was missing and the guys that they were like the backup plans just weren't at that level of the guys that they're getting
No.
now. Right. So,
No.
because even you can say that like Notre Dame went all in on Will Shipley. They got Logan Diggins and Audric Estime. Like they ended up doing pretty well. I think they're just in a great spot right now, and it's as good as any backfield in the country.
Greg just put it up on the screen. That's the reason why. There is nowhere for them to transfer that has a better situation with ND's potential offensive line in 2026.
Yeah.
Literally every single guy that's going to start this year has eligibility next year. And, as much as I like Emil Wagner, he's still not quite at 300 pounds. And while I think he's going to play well and earn himself an NFL draft grade, is he going to be higher in the third round? I don't know. We'll see. Now, for a guy like Blake Fisher, that was enough to go. So maybe he goes. But I don't see Billy Stroud playing into higher in the third round. Maybe he will. But I think he's going to be very good. And certainly next year, the following year, he's going to be even better than that. And then, of course, Ashton Craig, he could potentially start at center, but centers don't get drafted very high. I don't think he's just a completely dominant center at this point. So all these guys are going to be back. And if you're Kedron Young and you're Aeneas Williams and you're Nolan James, you got to be like, man, I want to run behind this offensive line, especially when they see what this offensive line is going to do in the run game this year. Obviously you got to have some good quarterback play, and hopefully we'll see that happen. So they don't just completely gang up on it. But I think the running back situation is going to be a lot of fun to watch here, and we'll see what happens. All right, we're going to get to some questions. I just kind of wanted to go O-line, quarterback, running back today, and then we'll take a look at wide receiver, O-line a little bit more in depth, and how we think things could shake out, portal, all that type of stuff next week. I'm sure we'll have some stuff as well, but let's get to some of the questions. You know what though? Let's get to the questions. We'll deal with the 2026 stuff next week. Okay. Well, first class.
Well, there's some questions on it, so we could there you go.
Yeah, top 5 wants on offense. He wants to know my top 5. It's hard to say because I don't know who they want at quarterback at this point. I don't think they know at this point who they want at quarterback. So, I'm sorry. You're talking about 2026. They already got the quarterback. I mean, me for running back, I really like, when I look at the running backs and who's been offered and that type of thing, I really like a lot of the guys, and they're starting to show up, obviously, and so that's exciting. Javian Osborne, if they got a great shot at him, heck, I'm thrilled with that. I really like the Brian Bonner kid. I think he's a really good player. It'll be interesting to see whether he shows up and visits, but I really like him. I think he's a really good player. Obviously, Jonas Walton's a pretty good player. We'll see how interested he is, whether Messiah Mickens, visits or whatever. I mean, personally, I like probably Javian Osborne more. Wide receiver, Jamie, for me, I think they need a big body. I know people were upset about them losing, the Mosley kid, and I think he's a pretty good player. Don't get me wrong, but I think Dylan Faison's the same guy. And how many slot type guys do you need?
those
You know,
guys are
so
a
I think,
lot easier to find than those
yeah,
big
yeah.
body guys. Yeah.
So you need some of the big bodies, and when I look at some of the guys, there's some underrated guys at wide receiver. I think that are kind of the big body guys, and I think when I look at, say, Brian Williams doesn't have a lot of big offers, but I like him on film. I think he's a pretty good player. I really like Braden Robinson. I'd love to have him. I think he's a really good player. Some of the bigger bodies I think are really needed. And I think more importantly, Jamie, you got to get, you can't go with, we need to get like just a big body. What they need to start doing is get a big body that's 6'3", 6'4", that can also stretch the field. Right. That's really what I think this team is missing right now, is somebody that's 6'3", 6'4", that in the boundary can also stretch the field. So you can't be worried so much about the back shoulder fade or the quick out. You also have to be worried about getting vertical. Therefore, that opens the back shoulder fade a lot. That opens a lot of the quick outs and things that you're looking to do. I think that is a very critical position for this recruiting class. Quickly, your thoughts there?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's and those guys really are the hardest guys to find. And because you mentioned Braden Robinson, like, I mean, I don't know where Notre Dame stands in terms of, like, obviously they're a contender for him, but let's
Sure.
just say they land Braden Robinson. Well, he's a very similar type of player to Mosley. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Like, they're the same type of, like, jitterbug slot athlete, very
Mm-hmm.
good players, but just like you can find those guys. Like, they're not like they're not a dime a dozen, but you can find them, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I think, yeah, I think that's big for me. I mean, you didn't talk about offensive tackle, but I know we have talked about it. Like, that's
Ojo,
something because I
I
mean,
need him.
Ojo, yes, like
Give me
he's
Ojo.
definitely, like, he would be like a top of the list guy, but you know, that's something that I think that they need to get, because I think really out of the guys that they have in the class right now, um, they're not they're probably all guards. Like, that's the way I
Yeah,
see it, right?
I
So
agree 100%. Yeah.
yeah, so if I'm looking at it from that perspective, um, I don't think that you know, I I don't know about, like, or Merrill maybe a right tackle, right? Like, I think that's something, but like the other two definitely interior guys. So from that perspective, I think you got to get an elite true tackle in the class. And I think you got to get that in every class, Mike. That's just
Yeah.
my opinion. You need at least
No, I agree.
one, true tackle. Like, you need that, that black type, Will Black type guy in each class, right? Like a Will Black, obviously, a Blake Fisher, a Joe Alt type. You want one of those guys, at least one in each class. So I think that to me really kind of stands out. But like, I think they're gonna do, no matter what, at tight end. I never worry about tight end there, because I just see it so often where, yes, it would be great if they get one of the elite guys. And I really like, obviously, Premer just visited, and I am a fan of his. He's very
Yeah,
good, right?
I
Like,
think he's good.
I
Yeah.
think it'd be great. And I think Gavin Mueller is like a really interesting kid too. Like, he's obviously a more recent offer guy. Who's like really good athlete. Like, but I think there's a lot of guys there that you can find guys at tight end too, because it's so projectable.
Mhm.
Um, where you can find Trembles and Evans, guys who aren't 4-star guys, that end up being like very, very good players. So I'm not that worried about what they're going to do at tight end. To me, it's really about, like, speed at wide receiver, and if you can get like size and speed at wide receiver, along with offensive tackle.
I think size is big, and I agree with you, offensive tackle, and that's why Ojo. I mean, look, you get the guy. He can play left. He can play right. It's kind of like an Emil Wagner. You look at the guy and you say, okay, um, look, he could play left tackle, but we don't need him at left tackle, so he can play right tackle and still be a pretty effective player. With Ojo, he can play either side. He's got the kind of size and speed. It's just his quickness is really, really good. And what I like about him, a lot of times when you get the big guys like that, that are quick, they're not a lot of times nasty. They just don't show that. He does. He wants to hit people. I like him a lot. I'd like him as much as anybody that they've landed in a very long time. I think he's got that kind of upside. A Gerby Lambert type of upside. Never probably going to be as big as Gerby Lambert, but I do think he can, if you could put Ojo on the left and put Gerby on the right, well, then you got something, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Then you got something that's pretty darn impressive. So, I think they're in good shape. Now he wants to know your top 5 defensive ones.
Oh yeah. So Rodney Dunham, obviously, who's the guy who just visited. I mean, I think he's one of the elite edge rushers in the class. I think he's just, to me, would be the best edge rush prospect that if they land him, would be the best edge rush prospect they landed in a long time.
Way better than Keon Keeley. I just want to say that.
Oh, they're different body types and different players, but I feel way more confident that Rodney Dunham is going to be a stud than
I do too.
Than Keon Keeley. I think you love the tools, but it was a lot of tools and more of that where Dunham, it's tools and film and all of that. And to me, he's the guy and he is, big time motor, number 1 at the top of the list for me. Obviously I know this guy is another, it's probably a long shot at this point because it seems like USC and Oregon are kind of like ahead of him, but he is going to take an official, that Talanoa Ely, who I love. Like, I think he is just a stud. Obviously he's in the same mold as the KVAs and the Madden Ferrermos in terms of just like a versatile athlete who can rush the passer, violent, just a stud. Like, just to me, like a guy that will play early and be really, really good. Like, hopefully he doesn't go to USC for Notre Dame. And then at DB, defensive tackle, I think is obvious. Huge need. I would say, I guess if I wanted to, I could just say Noah Clark, Tiki Hola, and Damari Simon. I would put Simeon. I would put all of those guys there, if I could. But if you just say 2 of those 3, I think, because to me, I think they need to get 2. I think they need to get 2. And if you get, if you just get 2, and it doesn't necessarily have to be those 3. They could be other defensive tackles, but those caliber of guys. Right.
I say they need those 3. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. But
you want to start landing the guys you really want,
Yes. Yeah. You want to get those top of the board guys. And then I think I'm going to cheat because it's going to be 6, but I'm going to say, Joey O'Brien, who's a safety, could play some corner stuff too. Obviously he's a stud, great ball skills, super long, really, really big fan of his. And I really like the Kari Adams kid. I think Kari Adams, is a very another guy who's like a super versatile athlete, very similar to like a Dallas Golden type, to me in a lot of ways. Just in terms of like this guy, you watch him on film and he pops, you're like, this guy's the best athlete on the field, and just one of those guys. And I'm a big, big fan of his too. So yeah, he would be another corner. And I'm just cheating again too, because I love the Jordan Thomas kid. So I picked through 8 guys up there out of 5, but to me, but that's the thing though, is that I think that if I'm looking at it from the perspective of like where Notre Dame is at, in recruiting, to me, I'm looking at all these guys, and to me, all these guys are just like studs. So if like they end up landing 4 of the 8 there, obviously like you want to land, most of them. But if you land like 4 of the 8 there, that's like a better defensive class than they've had in most classes that they've had. So I just really think they're in on these guys. Obviously got to close, Dunham, a lot of good momentum there. And that, to me, that's thrilling for Notre Dame fans because
Yeah.
I think he has a chance to be special.
I agree. I think that that's it. You mentioned Jordan Thomas. Notre Dame used to really do well in New Jersey. They used to recruit really, really well, and Penn State's kind of taken that over a little bit. And Michigan's starting to get in there too. Notre Dame needs to get back in New Jersey and a lot of those eastern, northern Atlantic states because they used to get a lot of really good talent there, and they are good football players there. And so I'm hoping that Notre Dame can get back and start landing some of those guys because they are very, very good football players. All right. Mike has the momentum of the 2026 class going. See, here's the thing. I think we just have to take a wait and see approach at this. And here's why. Right now you're hearing lots of positive things after these visits, and that's great. But you want to hear that. I want to hear that. But it's only as good as the information you're getting, right? And so what does that mean? In the past, we've heard this stuff over and over and over again, and it never quite equated to the rosy, positive feedback that we would get. It just never quite equated to that. Now, the people, sharing information has changed. But is it the same situation or is it something different? And I don't know. So I think that the big thing here is you really have to be careful before you get too excited. But I'm glad to see lots of people talking about Mike Martin. I love to see that. That's very, very important. Not just the fact that they like him as a recruiting guy, and that's important, but when you're also negotiating with somebody, it helps if you like the guy, right? You're probably going to bend a little bit if you like the guy. You're probably, if you don't like the guy, you're not going to bend. And so I think that that's very, very important. So I love the fact that they're including him in a lot of this. It's very, very important that he has a good relationship, not only with the player, but his families, the agents, everybody, because he's going to be very important, the glue that kind of keeps things together. I liked hearing that. So I think a lot of positive things have happened, and we'll see. As far as who the 2027 quarterbacks are, to be honest, Jimmy, I have not watched many of them yet. I've only watched a couple. I just haven't had time. I've been kind of catching up on all the 2026 guys. Now that they've been out there, I haven't watched a ton of them to know. Anybody that you like at this point?
Yeah, I was going to say to Drabowski, who asked these questions. Thanks to Drabowski for always asking these recruiting questions each week. Just ask again in May. Ask this question again in May because I think Mike and I will both have like a better answer for you then. Obviously, that'll be the eval period too, where they're going to get to watch a lot of these guys like throw during that time too. So I imagine that'll be when there starts a bunch of offers will go out to quarterbacks. But ask again at that time.
For me personally, I think the 2027 quarterback is huge for the future of the program. And I think it's massive for the future of the program. And they got to get somebody who's a big, big time prospect. And, I like Aberts or Heberts. I like Grubbs. I think they're solid players. I don't see Deuce Knight potential in either of those guys. Now, I think potentially you could see either one of those guys really elevate their game and become really great players. But, first pick of the draft type of player, I don't think either of those guys have the physical talents to do that right now. Will they develop that? Potentially, but physical talents are hard to develop after a while. You just are who you are. Mentally is a different story, and a lot of guys can get a lot better mentally. And I think a guy like Herbert, he has a lot to grow mentally, but he's got really good physical skills. Where I look at Grubbs, and I think he's a pretty solid, polished player already. Probably needs to make a little less bad decisions. And I think, some of his interceptions last year that we watched really kind of showed that. If he gets better at his decision making, I think he can be a pretty good player. But for me, 27 is a really big year for quarterback recruiting. All right. Uh, how many skill positions how many positions per group do they take for 2026? I don't know, Jamie. I think they take one running back, potentially two running backs. I'd say at least three wide receivers. Notre Dame's gonna take two tight ends. I think they have to. I think four O linemen would be the max at this point. Anything you agree, disagree with?
No, that's kind of how I see it too. I mean, I could see them take four receivers,
Yeah.
and I don't think they will take more than four offensive linemen. But I always kind of like reserve that, like it's like, we always say this, but it never happens. We say like, well, if there's another guy there that's this level, but then they never seem to get that guy. But I could see that because I mean, and just in terms of some of the offensive tackles that they're after, I think like, if two of those guys wanted to come, I think you'd probably say yes to both.
What I would do would be, depending, like if it's Ojo, I wouldn't lock it up, but I would say I'm going to keep recruiting, but I wouldn't make it public, right? I'd go big game hunting at that point and do everything behind the scenes, because I think what they're going to see is Notre Dame's offensive line. I think is going to be really good next year, and guys notice that. They really notice that. And if Notre Dame plays like they did last year, this year, that's really going to be a big thing for kids moving forward. If they see the same kind of gritty toughness, we're just going to mow your ass over type of offense again, that's going to make a big difference. And I think the problem Notre Dame's had in the past is they've never been able to stack one great year with another great year right behind it to where they're, a national championship real contender. If they can do that, I think that's really going to make a big difference in what we see and how interested guys are going to be. All right. One of the one guys that you think won't start this year, who do you think makes a move this spring, not necessarily to start this year, but solidifying his place for the future? What do you think there, Jamie?
I mean, it just at like any position, kind of, right? Like,
Yeah.
man, I mean, it just feels like I could name like five guys. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of people here. I'm gonna say Kennedy Urlacher is one of these people that I'm not sure he's gonna start, but I think he's going to play this year. And I mean, he might start, but if he's going to play this year, and people are going to be like, oh, he's going to like all those kind of things that you saw in the Purdue game. You're going to see more of that kind of stuff to the point that you're going to think, oh, this guy is going to be very, very good. And he's going to be like a player for Notre Dame for quite a while. And then I'm going to say on the defensive line as well, I'm going to say that just Armel Mukum is going to be a guy that gets into the rotation, probably doesn't start, but like it's going to show at the end of like, oh, this guy's going to be like a guy who's going to, play a decent amount for Notre Dame for quite a while and be a good player.
Yeah. For me, two guys I hope that it is are Logan Saldate and Cam Williams, right? I think you want at least one of those guys to really make some noise, and I'm hoping it's both, because if it is, then I think we're going to be in good shape. So I'm hoping at least one of those guys, and hopefully both. All right. What would you do with all these running backs? We kind of talked about that. Again, I think it's going to be difficult for them to play more than three. Others will play, hopefully in garbage time, that type of thing. But, we'll see. What is your preferred offseason coping mechanism? Deep dive in the roster, follow recruiting hard, relive the previous season, insider talk with other restless ND insiders. I hate to say it, but I really like the UFL, man. I like watching those games. I don't know why. It gives me joy to watch them. Those guys are playing hard because they're trying to get an NFL job, and so it's a lot better football than you think it is if you just sit down and watch it. But so that's it. Obviously spring practice, you get excited, and And but I think that those are really about the only two things that are a cure for me. Anything for you, Jamie?
I mean, for me, it's recruiting and just like looking at obviously not just the Notre Dame guys, but just kind of like national recruiting and like kind of who's out there, because I think it's a good thing too. Like you obviously do the Fab 50 for the site, but it's a good thing to look at like the guys that not only that you know who you're like, oh, you wish Notre Dame would have got in on this guy or that or this, but it's also these are guys that Notre Dame's going to have to see at in a lot of cases, especially if they're going deep into the playoffs. So, and that kind of leads into like, I really like deep diving into, the teams they're playing in the year, and just like really kind of like looking at that and looking at their rosters and looking at like, the changes they've made. And obviously that's part of like content of what we do in the off season. And then, but it really kind of helps me like for prep during the season as well. But I just generally kind of like enjoy like looking at those teams and kind of looking at like who's Notre Dame's going to play against, who they're going to see during the regular season, and then even some of those teams that like obviously like they aren't in the schedule, but you maybe see them later down the line.
All right. What two players, two on offense, two on defense, have the highest ceiling for 2025? And what does that ceiling look like, not counting Jeremiah Love and Leonard Moore? Highest upside. I mean, I think, Jadarian Price. And again, I think you're right, Jamie. He could end up with, 900 yards rushing. I think that's a very possible thing. I think Bryce Young could have a monster year. He really could. And would that be, 8-9 sacks? It's certainly possible. I think he's got, out of everybody on defense, I think he probably has the most upside out of anybody. Thoughts from you?
Yeah, him, and then I would say KVA as well. Would be the two guys for me on defense. And then I would say on offense, Jugusaw, and then I mean,
think of him. Yeah.
You could easily say Great House too, but I'm going to say Raritan, because I think we've been waiting kind of for it, obviously, and we saw like definitely signs of it last year. But like, I just thought part of it is how he blocked, and man, he was just dominate, with what he could do as a blocker. But I really think like he can kind of be like one of these guys where all of a sudden people are like, oh man, he's going to be a high pick in the NFL draft. And then, as Greg pointed out, Malachi Fields could be 2019 Chase Claypool. I think it's on the table.
All right. At the end of the upcoming regular season, will Indy have more passing yards than they had last season? What do you think there, Yama?
Oh yeah, 100%. 100%.
You think so?
I think that's. Oh yeah. I mean, Riley Leonard only had 4 200-yard passing games during the entire regular season last year. And then obviously he threw for 200 in 3 of the 4 playoff games. So, that was good. But like, I think that whoever the quarterback is this year is going to average over 200 yards passing a game. So I think it's going to be significantly higher this year.
I think it could be. And I'll tell you why it might not be. Miami, bad rush defense, just not very good. Texas A&M, I think they'll be a little better, but I don't know. I mean, Notre Dame ran on them last year with a very suspect offensive line. Purdue, terrible rush defense. Arkansas, not very good. Boise State had a fairly good rush defense, but I don't know how many of those guys return. NC State always has a pretty stout defense, so they may be a little bit tough. USC, come on. Boston College, I don't see it. Navy, Notre Dame runs all over them. Pitt, be interesting. They always have some interior guys that are pretty good. Syracuse, we'll see what they're like at the end of the year. And then Stanford, I don't see a lot of teams that are going to be good defenses that can stop Notre Dame's run. And why put the ball in the air in jeopardy if you can run the football? Now, you're going to need to be able to throw the football if you get to the playoffs, so you're going to have to work on it. But I have a feeling Notre Dame's going to be able to run on a lot of these teams and probably put a lot of them away just by running the football. So I do think that the number will be bigger. I'm just not sure how much bigger, because I just don't think that they face a lot of great defenses, especially kind of rush defenses. Dispute that? Any thoughts there?
No, I mean, I definitely think they're going to have games where they're like, man, they put up like 300 yards rushing on this, there. And I think that I would be kind of shocked if there wasn't like one or two games from Jeremiah Love this season where you're like, oh, he went for 220 or something, like, or he went for 150 and, Price went for 100 or something, like there's going to be games like that. So, yeah, I think from that perspective, I don't think it's going to be. They're not breaking records for what they're going to pass this year. I just think, as Greg threw up the stat that it was the lowest yards passing per game since 2017 with Wimbush last year. I mean, it's going to be more. I would just expect it kind of like how you saw like when they went to book the next year. Notre Dame's passing offense in 2018 didn't light the world on fire, but it still was significantly better than the 17. Yeah.
All right. How hard will it be to find a leader amongst quarterbacks having three players competing for the starting job? He says he won't announce until one shows himself above the others. Most don't expect that to happen in the spring. Is this what you think happens even if one clearly shows out for the spring? I wouldn't be surprised at the end if one clearly showed that they were better, that he announced it. And I'll tell you why, because I think that the other guys will know anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You've been a player. You know when somebody's way better than you. You just know it, and you know that you're just not playing ahead of that person. And it's hard. It's hard to grasp and accept that. But it's you always know if somebody's better than you. And so, if it's that big of a difference, which I don't think it's going to be, you may as well answer, or you may as well name it. All right, last question. What can be done with men's basketball? Can they really fire Shrewsbury after 3 seasons if they can continue to be unwatchable? I am not well-versed in Notre Dame basketball, men's basketball, so I'm probably not the guy to answer that question. What I have seen is kind of 2 rebuilds that just didn't work, right? And you go in the portal and they just didn't work. And not only didn't they work, but at the end, it just didn't look like guys were into it anymore. And man, if you do that a third time, I just don't see how you continue to go down that path. And look, if you lose Burton and you lose your best players, what's the odds you're going to be very good next year anyway? I don't know. It's not the way Notre Dame had their season unfold. It's not like a lot of guys, top players, are beating down the door to come to Notre Dame. So I don't know. You have any thoughts here, Jamie?
I mean, I just, you look at the record wise, and I understand, like, obviously, like, Shrewsbury, like, kind of like pounded the table, like, we're doing this the right way, and we're doing this, and we're, kind of like being defiant against a question that wasn't even asked or whatever in that, viral moment. Right. But like, if the record is around the same and they just don't even sniff the tournament, I don't know how they keep them. Like, I just don't think you just can't do that. You can't show no progress in 3 years. And like you said, they've kind of like tried different things. They're trying to do it, but it's like, then you don't have a direction. And if you don't have a direction kind of going forward, why are you sticking with that person? Right. So,
well, and let's be honest, this was the worst ACC year as far as teams across the board. Duke's pretty good, but everybody else stunk, and they're proving it in the tournament. You know what I mean? So this is not a good conference that they're playing in right now, and they're not playing even, a lot of times uh, effective in that, or even playing real competitive against some of the bad teams. So um, I'm not saying that they're terrible, but when you lose, if they were to lose Burton, I don't see how you win. I just don't see how you win. You're not going to find players in the portal that are going to come in and
Be as
suddenly
good as
fix this.
him. No.
Yeah, I just don't see it. So, and like you said, if they're the third year in a row, I hate to say it, but the way the game is gone anymore. And look, there's a lot of good coaches that are struggling with this portal thing. It's a tough situation. If you build your program on toughness and discipline, if you don't win right away, you're done. It's just because kids aren't going to put up with it. So, um, I don't know what the magic thing is, and we were talking, Jamie, Greg, and I before, and it's just like, no. I mean, I bet the numbers of this tournament are going to be way low, way surprisingly low, because people just don't care. It's just not the same. The sport isn't the same. So I'll be surprised if the numbers are anywhere near what they've been in the past. Because the games haven't been exciting really either. So I don't know. I guess we'll see.
I mean, I just think too that, which is one of the reasons, is that we were kind of briefly chatting about it before too, is that people don't develop like fandoms around these players that have stuck around for that long. Either they're so good that they leave early, or if you are at a school where it's like a guy, maybe in today's day and age, maybe he would have stayed, but like Steph Curry probably doesn't stay at Davidson. He goes somewhere else, and that changes how that looks. And it's different. And that's just part of the underdog part of college basketball was probably the best part of the tournament. And if that doesn't exist anymore, yeah, that's tough. That's tough.
Yeah, I agree. All right, folks, that's going to be it for the show. Hope you enjoyed that. We will be back next week to talk some Irish football and recruiting. Thanks for listening and watching on YouTube. Make sure you check out our YouTube channel, and if you would like and subscribe, that would be fantastic. And then, of course, if you would, share the show with people. If you like the show, send it out to your friends on social media. We could use all the views and downloads we can get. So thanks for listening and watching. We'll talk to you next week on Power Hour.